So what we're going to be looking at in this lesson is we're going to be looking at some of the institutions of government that exist within Great Britain. The British government is a parliamentary system. So in this system there is an executive, a legislature, and a judiciary, but they function very differently than in a presidential system. The executive and the legislative branches are fused together, with the Prime Minister and members of the cabinet being sitting members of Parliament. So, you have to be a member of Parliament in order to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And we talked about this in our last unit. Remember, you're not voting specifically for the Prime Minister. You're voting for people within that party who you want to see dominate and become the majority of that government. You know who the person who would be Prime Minister is when you go to vote, but you're still not voting for that individual directly. All right? Because of this, because of how the system is set up, because the executive and the legislative concept are fused, and because the judicial branch really lacks the power of judicial review, there is no concept of separation of powers like we're used to in the United States. One of the concepts that we think about with this is the idea of parliamentary sovereignty, that Parliament has the freedom and the individualness to be able to pass the things that they see fit for the country. Britain is a unitary state. Political authority is centralized in London, and all decisions made are binding. I know that we talked a little bit in our previous lesson about Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland being able to have their own kind of assemblies and things like that. And remember, we talked about the idea that even though they have those assemblies and have a little bit more authority than they used to about what happens locally, law passed by Parliament is overriding. So when we look at the Cabinet and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet compromises both the Prime Minister and his ministers. Each of these individuals is from the majority party or from the coalition. So in this instance, because we have a coalition government right now going on in the UK, we've got people from multiple parties who make up that cabinet. Now, if it's only one party, generally, unless we're talking about like that post-World War II reign that we talked about there for a while, you really only have people from one party as part of the cabinet. The term collective cabinet refers to the center of policy making in the British political system. The Prime Minister has the responsibility of shaping their decisions on policy. There is not a vote in the Cabinet, and all ministers publicly support the Prime Minister's decision. So that's going to happen no matter what, that they're going to support the Prime Minister's decision, even if there is a discussion that goes on behind closed doors about that they don't agree with what he says, they're still going to support that within public. The Cabinet takes on what they call a collective responsibility for making policy for the country. They're all involved in that process. They're the ones that are going to shape those ideals, and what the Cabinet says is what's going to go. The Prime Minister is what they refer to as the first among equals, because they are all members of Parliament. But he's the one at the top who is in charge of making the decisions. Alright, the Prime Minister is elected by the majority party in Parliament, or in the case of 2012, by a coalition government. The Prime Minister speaks legitimately for all members of Parliament. They choose cabinet members and important subordinate posts. They make decisions in the cabinet with the agreement of the ministers, and campaigns for and represents the party in parliamentary elections. The House of Commons is the lower house of the legislature. The party that opposes the majority party is known as the opposition party, and they are also known as the loyal opposition. Working for the loyal opposition is a group of people known as the shadow cabinet. The shadow cabinet are the leaders of the loyal opposition. So they are the main people, they are the top people, the people that would probably be in the cabinet or in the leadership if they were in the majority. And those are the people that work to try and argue against what the majority is doing. Less influential MPs are referred to as backbenchers. Debate in the House of Commons is usually loud and contentious. This is especially true during question time. During this period, the Prime Minister and his cabinet must defend themselves against attack from the opposition, and sometimes from members of their own party. This is very, 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 very different than what you see in American government. When we talk about the concept of American government, there are very strict, what we refer to as parliamentary procedures, in which you can only speak when the Speaker of the House represents you. You are supposed to be calm, you are supposed to be collegial, you are supposed to be gentlemanly. All of these things are things that are supposed to be characteristics of people that are within the U.S. government. When we talk about British government, it's very, very different than that. They hurl insults at each other, they're loud, they yell. It's a much more entertaining thing to watch than it is to watch American government. The Speaker of the House presides over the debate and allows all to be heard. So even though the Speaker of the House is part of one of the parties that's in there, he is trying to make sure that everybody has the ability to be heard and that everybody has their point of view recognized. All right, this is how Parliament is laid out. So you can see kind of where everybody sits and how different things go on. And there's a reason why we talked about the individuals that are referred to as backbenchers. They're called backbenchers because they literally sit in the back. All right, party discipline. Party discipline is integral to the success of government. If there is a vote of no confidence, the cabinet by tradition must resign immediately, and elections for new members of parliament must be held as soon as possible. So a vote of no confidence takes place is if the Prime Minister wants to see a certain type of legislation passed and a majority of the people don't vote for that legislation like they're supposed to, then the Prime Minister is supposed to resign and allow for new elections to take place. Parliament has substantial powers for members that include the ability to debate and refine potential legislation. They are the only ones who may become party leaders, the ability to scrutinize the administration of laws, and the ability to keep communication lines between voters and ministers. So once again, even though they have the ability to debate and refine potential legislation, the majority party always gets what they want, and the Prime Minister is in charge of making sure those policies get through. The second house in Parliament is known as the House of Lords. The House of Lords is the only hereditary parliamentary house in existence today, and even that they have tried to severely limit over recent history. The House of Lords has a minimal impact on the workings of Parliament. The main powers of the House of Lords are the ability to delay legislation and to debate technicalities of proposed bills. They can only delay for a certain amount of time before the House of Representatives has the right to take that bill back and pass it even if they want to, even if the House of Lords doesn't want them to. And they can suggest changes that they would like to see in bills, but the House of Commons could completely ignore that. The House of Lords can also add amendments to the bill, but those can be removed with a simple majority vote in the House of Commons. So once again, even if amendments are proposed to a bill, the House of Commons can completely ignore those proposals. The House of Lords formerly had a group called the Law Lords, who had the ability to rule acts unconstitutional, but that power was removed in 1999. So really, once again, the House of Lords is there because of tradition, not because they really have any sort of power about what happens within the government. There has been talk about changing the House of Lords so that it contains either voted or appointed members, but no change has taken place as of this point. There has been a lot of discussion, once again, of getting rid of all of those hereditary positions within the government. The United Kingdom also has a bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is stable and powerful. Many top-level bureaucrats directly advise ministers and the Prime Minister and have a great power in the creation of policy. Bureaucrats have a great discretionary power to make decisions about the implementation of legislation. They are able to really kind of pick and choose how they want to see things implemented within the system. And one of the big reasons why they have such discretion as to what goes on within their agencies is that because the ministers within the cabinet really rely on those bureaucrats to make decisions. They talk about what's going on within those agencies, the types of policies that they would like to see, the types of things that would make their jobs easier, the types of things that would make their jobs better, and that's the type of legislation that they try and pass, which goes back to that idea that we talked about before, about the idea of neo-corporatism. The judiciary. British government is largely based upon parliamentary sovereignty, and we talked about that before, and that's the idea that all powers are fused within the parliament. All right. So the fusion of powers very much changes the way things work, and it's very different than the American system where we're used to the idea of checks and balances. There is no concept of judicial review in Britain. The court system within the UK does not have the power to rule things as being unconstitutional or being against tradition and things like that. All right. The Westminster model, the idea that parliamentary sovereignty exists, is supposed to be the format of the government. The Parliament has the supreme authority to do what they want to do. The British legal system, like we've talked about before, is based upon common law. All right, so we'll look at that. Common law is based upon the idea of tradition and the things that have happened before. All right, code law does exist, but it is based upon strict interpretations of written statutes. So remember, code laws are things that are written down for all people to see. In 2009, a Supreme Court was created to replace the law lords. The court has a president and 11 justices appointed by a panel of lawyers. Their chief function is to serve as the final court of appeal on points of law in cases across the country. Scotland has their own system. There is no judicial review. The Supreme Court does not function the way that it does in the United States. They're only there as the top court of appeals for criminal proceedings. The court can nullify government actions if they are judged to exceed powers granted by the Act of Parliament, but cannot declare an Act of Parliament unconstitutional. Britain is now also bound by the European Union's treaties and laws. The courts then determine if British law conflicts with EU law. EU law can supersede British law.